Welcome to The Bishop Owns the Knight. I'm Grandmaster Max Illingworth, and for today's video, we're going to see how Carlsen got a bishop against Caruana's knight, and then owned that knight. So, I'll take through the opening moves really quickly, because it fits nicely with the theme from the previous video of how to play against the isolated queen's pawn, but that's not the theme I'm going to focus on here. Instead, the theme I'm going to be focusing on is how to win when we have a bishop against their knight on the open board. So finally, after playing all these moves, we get the familiar isolated queen's pawn position. But if you thought that pawn was a serious weakling, well, you don't realize just how big of a weakling it was. Because after bishop b2, castles, knight c3, rook f8, then we have, boom, knight takes d5. And for those of you who are wondering, oh, it's a blunder, Max. Well, there's a little battery on the long diagonal that would finish off the black king there. So, bishop h2 is played, king takes, and now we get to the fun part, where the queens are traded, and we've got the bishop against the knight. And I think you already know from this position that white is better, otherwise it would have been the knight owns the bishop, right? But what would be the follow-up plan after the next moves? Rook fd1, black played rook e to d8. I think rook a d8 is a little bit more natural, but with this move, black wants to keep some options up his sleeve, let's say. So rook a c1. And here black should play the move knight b4 to try and get the knight into d3, trading off the knight for the bishop, allowing black to try and equalize. Instead, though, we had the move f6. And this gave Carlsen an opportunity to turn the screws and take this sort of light, quiet, almost Taoist positional pressure into like a heavy metal, Metallica rock concert level of energy. So what's the move that white played in this position to crank up the pressure and crank up the volume? Now, if you don't see the answer, don't worry. You can pause the video, think about it as long as you need. I don't care if it's 2 minutes or 20 minutes or however long it is. But make sure you come back here when you've decided on your move, and we'll have a good talk about the position. Okay, so there are actually a lot of good moves for white at this point. I mean, there's so many, it could be an indecision of, for those who try to play the absolute best move every move, oh, but they're all so good. It's like being on the buffet, and I don't know if you know those sushi trains, you have the sushi rolls coming across, and you don't take the good one because you're waiting to see if there's an even better sushi coming up. Well, that's kind of what this position is like. In it, yeah, you could play a3 to go knight e4 out, getting kicked with knight to b4. Those who like a very Petrosian-ish kind of prophylaxis. If you like Lila Zero, you can push the rook pawn up the board, because that's what the cool kids do. Or you could play the move that Carlsen played. I think that was the best move of all. He played the move rook d4 and well, what's so special about rook d4, Max? Well, the threat is, let's just say I play king f7 for argument's sake, try and get the king in the center. Well, now we have this thing called a pin. And after rook cd1, obviously moving a knight hangs the rook on d8. But if king e6, we have good old pinning and winning from Fred Reinfeld. e4, if the knight moves, they lose the rook. If a knight doesn't move, they lose the knight. Either way, we win. So that means black has to move his knight away to avoid losing that prized steed. Well, if you play knight b6, well, I think you can guess what white's move would be in this case. Or actually, there's more than one good move in this position. And I'll give you a hint that it's a move with the c1 rook. But I'm not going to give away which move it is, because I have another puzzle for you. Caruana played knight e7 in the game. And what's the move that white should play here? There was also a good move against knight b6 before. Yeah, you got it, students. It's rook to c7, forking the knight and the pawn. But it's not the end of the story. So after knight f5, Carlsen didn't play the move that I thought he would play. You see, it's easy to assume, well, let's just take the rook and take the pawn and just win like a piece of cake. But we should remember that the opponent has some counterplayer as well, that they have their own ideas. And with rook d2, we're forking the bishop and the pawn. And since if we move the bishop, they can take this pawn, defend this one. And suddenly it's not so clear that white is winning anymore. Now, to be fair, in the position of rook d8, you're probably still winning anyway if you play e4. And use the e-pawn as a battering ram, so you can open up the long diagonal for your bishop and get the pressure against g7 to take control of the game. So that would still be winning, but Carlsen chose a different route with rook g4, threatening bishop f6 that way. Okay, maybe it's not as good as rook d8, but it was good enough in the game. So after rook g6, black didn't take the opportunity to go rook c8 and do the idea we saw before of sacking the pawn to at least get the rook active and get some chance of counterplay. It's better to die fighting with your, still trying to throw punches than just waiting for the executioner's axe to fall on your head, which is kind of what happened to Caruana. He played rook e8. I think you see which is the better pawn to take in this position, right? We play bishop takes f6 to hit this. Now you might be worried saying, oh, but what about the pin? What about the pin, Max? And then had rook e3, e6. But actually there are a few good moves to deal with this. You're winning if you sack back the exchange to keep your monster bishop alive. In the game, Carlsen played e4, which was just as strong, maybe even stronger. After rook e4, so obviously the knight was under attack. Rook g5. Some more moves were played from here, but the result was not really in doubt. Obviously, we don't want to allow a rook e1 mate. Technically, bishop c3 was the fastest win, but also after g3. In the game, this was also winning, as white as a pawn up, and you can even think about taking a second pawn. I don't have time to show you all the remaining moves, but white did go on to win this game pretty handily. And I think that you would probably beat me if you had this position playing it as white. So, anyway, that's the lesson for today's video. So, why is it that you think the bishop was so much more effective than the knight in this position? And what's the lesson that you're going to take away from this game, from this Grandmaster mini lesson? Is it going to be how powerful those rooks were? Is it going to be the importance of taking the initiative, getting the rooks to attack their weaknesses? Or is it going to be making sure you keep control of the position and don't allow them counterplay to get their rooks active? Whatever it is, I'd love to hear your thoughts and the feedback in the comments, because your feedback is how we all learn and how we all improve together. Because we're all in this chess improvement journey together, right? So I'll see you in the next video, another Grandmaster lesson, and until then, happy chessing.